The terminal was busy, filled with travelers rushing to their gates, dragging suitcases and sipping coffee. Among them walked Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, dressed simply in jeans, sneakers, and a gray hoodie. She had just returned from a humanitarian visit abroad and wanted nothing more than to get home quietly, without attention or cameras. But as she approached the security checkpoint, two TSA officers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a tall man with sharp eyes, whispered, "Keep an eye on that woman. Something about her looks off." The other nodded, already stepping forward. "Ma'am, can you step aside for additional screening?" AOC blinked in surprise but complied, setting down her carry-on and removing her jacket. "Of course," she said calmly. "Is there a reason?" The officer avoided her gaze. Random inspection. But it wasn't random, not really. She noticed how others walked past without a problem, how their glances shifted toward her with curiosity. The whispers began. Some passengers recognized her vaguely but weren't sure was it really her. Another officer joined in, checking her passport like it might contain a secret code. "Where are you coming from?" he asked sternly. "From a policy summit in Geneva," AOC replied politely. "I'm a member of the U.S. Congress." The man frowned. We'll need to verify that." His tone made it sound less like a question and more like an accusation. AOC stayed calm, folding her hands in front of her. Years in politics had taught her that anger rarely wins a fight, patience does. Still, she could feel eyes on her, the quiet judgment of strangers assuming guilt before truth. A few travelers began recording the scene on their phones. A mother whispered to her son, "Isn't that?" but stopped when a guard glared her way. The tension thickened as more officers gathered. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing at her passport, then at her face. Someone muttered, "Let's contact federal authorities just in case," and that's when AOC realized what was happening. They didn't see a congresswoman, they saw a suspicious woman. She took a slow breath, looked around at the watching crowd, and thought quietly, "Let them see how power truly responds, not with anger, but with grace." AOC stood quietly beside the inspection table, her passport open, in front of two security officers who still hadn't decided what to do with her. One of them, Officer Miller, was tapping something into a small handheld device, while the other kept a cautious distance, arms crossed. Travelers were moving around them, some pretending not to look, others blatantly staring. The tension hung thick in the air, almost visible. "Ma'am," Officer Miller finally said, "we've got some inconsistencies here." AOC raised an eyebrow. "Inconsistencies?" He cleared his throat. "You said you were coming from Geneva, right? What were you doing there?" "I was attending a policy summit," she replied evenly, "with members of the World Economic Forum. My schedule and documentation should all match what's on that passport." Miller exchanged a skeptical glance with his partner. "A summit? For what exactly?" AOC sighed softly. "For climate and global development policy. I'm a member of the United States Congress." That earned a small snort from one of the nearby officers. "Sure you are." AOC looked at him, calm but firm. "I can show you my congressional ID if you'd like." "No, ma'am, that won't be necessary just yet," Miller said. "We'll need to confirm your identity through federal channels. Please remain right here." The phrase "federal channels" made a few people around her whisper. Some had started recording on their phones, holding them low but obvious enough to show the scene was being documented. AOC glanced briefly at them young travelers, families, business people, and smiled faintly, not in arrogance but in reassurance. She didn't want anyone to panic, especially not her. But inside, she could feel a tightness growing in her chest. Not fear, frustration. The kind that comes from being treated as a problem when you've done nothing wrong. One officer stepped away to make a call, murmuring into his radio. The other began searching her bag piece by piece: laptop, travel notebook, a folder of printed documents, her phone charger. Everything was handled as if it might explode. "Careful," AOC said softly. "There are congressional papers in there." The officer looked up. "We'll determine that." The crowd began to shift closer, whispering. A man in a suit whispered to his wife, "She looks like that congresswoman from New York." His wife frowned. If she were, they wouldn't treat her like that. And that was the painful truth. No matter who she was, no matter what she'd achieved without her title or makeup or cameras, she was just another woman being profiled. Miller came back, holding his radio. "Headquarters wants us to stay put. They're verifying her name. They also want us to alert the FBI liaison." "The FBI?" someone in the crowd echoed. AOC straightened. You're calling the FBI? Because I flew in from Switzerland? Miller's tone stayed stiff. Ma'am, we're just following procedure. She looked directly into his eyes and said gently, sometimes procedure is how injustice hides itself. That line landed like a soft punch, quiet but powerful. Miller avoided her gaze. A few passengers began murmuring louder now, taking sides. This isn't right, said an older woman nearby. She's not resisting. She's being respectful. A younger man added, I recognize her. That's definitely AOC. The officers exchanged nervous glances, but didn't move. The situation had become public, and that made them defensive. AOC folded her hands again, standing tall despite the tension. You have every right to keep people safe, she said. But safety isn't about suspicion, it's about fairness. The officer who was recording her belongings paused, clearly uncomfortable. Ma'am, please, just let us do our job. I am, she replied quietly. But ask yourself, would you be doing it this way if I looked different? That question hit him harder than she intended. He froze for a moment, then resumed his work in silence. More people had stopped to watch. A few began whispering her name out loud. Now it is her. That's the congresswoman. Why are they treating her like this? The officer's authority was slipping, and they knew it. One of them muttered under his breath, this is getting out of hand. Another whispered, we might be in trouble if she really is who they say she is. AOC didn't move, didn't flinch. She kept her eyes steady, breathing evenly, waiting for the truth to catch up with the fear in the room. A small child tugged his mother's sleeve. Mom, why are they being mean to that lady? The mother glanced down, hesitated, then whispered, sometimes people forget to look with kindness first. Have you ever been unfairly judged or profiled because of how you look? Tell me in the comments and let me know which city or country you're watching from. The clock above gate 17 ticked loudly, its steady rhythm cutting through the uneasy silence. AOC stood still in the center of the inspection area, surrounded by uniformed officers who now looked less confident than before. They had already detained her for nearly half an hour, and yet none of them seemed sure what exactly they were accusing her of. One of the officers had stepped away to speak with the federal liaison. The others kept their distance, pretending to monitor her. The crowd had grown larger now, dozens of travelers, cell phones raised, whispering in disbelief. AOC knew this was spiraling, not because she had done anything wrong but because fear has a way of feeding on itself. She glanced down at her phone, which had been placed on the table beside her bag. She wasn't allowed to touch it. Still, she could see the screen light up, dozens of missed calls and messages from her staff who were likely tracking her delayed flight. Officer Miller cleared his throat. Ma'am, the FBI is on their way to verify your identity. She nodded, her tone steady. That's fine. But I do wonder how many other people have you called the FBI on today? Miller hesitated, his jaw tightening. We have procedures, she repeated quietly. Or assumptions. The question lingered in the air like a slow-moving echo. Even the officer holding her passport glanced up briefly, then looked away. She continued, not with anger, but with calm, deliberate words. Every person walking through this airport deserves the same respect whether they wear a suit, a hoodie, or a uniform. The badge on your chest doesn't make you better than them. It gives you a responsibility to protect them. Her voice was low, but it carried power. People nearby could hear her now. Some nodded subtly, others whispered. The woman from earlier, the one comforting her child, recorded with tears in her eyes. Miller crossed his arms. Ma'am, we're not here to debate politics. I'm not debating, she said simply. I'm reminding. Another officer returned, whispering in Miller's ear. They're 5 minutes out, he said. AOC caught that. She inhaled deeply, reminding herself that losing patience now would mean losing the message. The youngest officer, barely out of training, looked visibly anxious. He finally blurted, why didn't you just tell us who you were from the start? AOC smiled gently. Would it have changed how you treated me? He froze. His silence was answer enough. The murmurs from the crowd grew stronger now. This is unbelievable, said one man. She's literally a sitting congresswoman. Another voice replied, they just don't want to admit they messed up. The scene was now half airport, half theater. Dozens of phones were pointed toward her, broadcasting live to social media. Within minutes, the footage would spread far beyond that terminal. But AOC didn't care about the cameras. She cared about the message. This wasn't just about her, it was about every person who had ever been made to feel small by someone hiding behind authority. She turned slightly toward the growing crowd. Please everyone, she said softly, stay calm. Let them do what they think is right. Sometimes the best way to expose injustice is to let it reveal itself. The words hit harder than she expected. Even some of the officers lowered their heads. The younger officer whispered to Miller, Sir, maybe we should just double-check online or call. Miller cut him off sharply. We're following protocol. If she really is who she claims to be, we'll know soon enough. AOC didn't flinch. She simply said, I hope that when you find out, you remember how you spoke to me before you knew my name. There was no sarcasm in her tone, just quiet disappointment. The minutes dragged. Then, somewhere near the escalators, the sound of heavy boots echoed. Everyone turned. 3 men in dark suits with FBI badges strode into the terminal. Their presence commanded immediate silence. Airport security straightened up, trying to look composed. One of them stepped forward. Officers, he said, we were told you have a suspect in custody? Miller nodded stiffly. Yes, sir. She presented herself as a congresswoman, but before he could finish, the lead FBI agent's eyes fell on AOC. His expression changed instantly: confusion, then shock, then unmistakable recognition. He walked right past the line of security officers, stopping directly in front of her. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, he said firmly, voice carrying through the terminal. We had no idea you were arriving today. The crowd gasped. Phones went up higher. Miller's jaw dropped. The agent nodded respectfully and then, to everyone's disbelief, saluted her. AOC smiled faintly, her tone calm and gracious. It's quite all right, Agent. I understand people are just doing their jobs. I only hope next time they remember what respect looks like while doing it. The airport fell completely silent. If you were in AOC's place, what would you do? Stay calm or speak out? Type calm if you'd keep your composure, or stand up if you'd confront them right away. The entire terminal seemed frozen in time. For several long seconds, no one moved, no one spoke, as if the sound of the FBI agent's salute had struck everyone mute. Even the hum of the conveyor belts and the beeping of luggage carts faded into the background. Officer Miller's face flushed red, his earlier confidence evaporating. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably beside him, avoiding AOC's gaze. The lead FBI agent, tall, composed, with silver streaks in his hair, lowered his salute and extended a respectful hand. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, he said clearly, on behalf of the Bureau, I apologize for this gross misunderstanding. AOC shook his hand firmly. Thank you, Agent, but I'd rather not have anyone punished. I just want everyone here to learn something. Her voice was calm, steady, and dignified, the kind of composure that can't be rehearsed, only earned. The crowd broke into quiet applause, hesitant at first, then stronger. The agent glanced around the room, then turned back toward the security officers. Do you realize who you just detained? Miller straightened his back. Sir, we were following security protocol. The agent cut him off sharply. Protocol doesn't include profiling an elected member of Congress for looking suspicious. AOC raised her hand gently. Please, let's not escalate this further. What matters isn't punishment, it's awareness. Her tone carried authority but also compassion, a rare balance that made everyone pause. The agent nodded slowly. Understood, ma'am. We'll make sure your belongings are returned immediately. He signaled to another officer to bring back her phone and carry-on bag. As she took her phone, the screen lit up again, hundreds of notifications now. The situation had already gone viral. Hashtags like #RespectAOC and #AirportIncident were trending nationwide. Clips of her quiet courage were spreading across social media, replayed millions of times. But AOC didn't look at any of it. Instead, she turned toward the officers who had detained her. Officer Miller, she began. Her voice was calm but carried weight. I know this wasn't personal, but I need you to think about what made you suspicious of me. Was it something I did, or just something about me that didn't fit your idea of normal? Miller's mouth opened, then closed again. He stared down at the floor. Ma'am, you don't need to answer now, she interrupted gently. Just remember that next time, when someone else stands in front of you, scared or confused, sometimes authority gives us power, but empathy gives us something stronger. A hush fell over the room again. Even the people recording had stopped talking. You could almost feel the weight of her words settling on every heart in that space. The young officer, the same one who'd questioned her earlier, suddenly spoke up, voice trembling slightly. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." AOC smiled softly. "You're learning. That's enough for today." Her words weren't scolding. They were healing. The FBI agent stepped closer. "Congresswoman will escort you personally to your gate. Please allow us to ensure there are no further interruptions." "Thank you, agent," she replied. "But I'll walk myself. I think the people here need to see that I am not above them just like them." The crowd erupted in applause again, louder this time. People stood, clapping, cheering, calling out her name. A few travelers even wiped their eyes. As she walked past the checkpoint, several officers lowered their heads in quiet shame. The woman with the child from earlier stepped forward and whispered, "Thank you for handling it with grace." AOC smiled warmly. "Thank you for watching and not turning away." That simple exchange said more than any speech could. When she finally reached the boarding area, the FBI agent caught up to her one last time. "Congresswoman," he said quietly, "for what it's worth, not everyone in law enforcement agrees with what happened here today. Some of us are trying to change that culture from the inside." AOC looked at him thoughtfully. "Then keep doing that, agent. That's how real change begins, not in the headlines, but in the heart." He nodded solemnly. "Yes, ma'am." As she turned to board her flight, a wave of relief washed over her. The exhaustion was real, but so was the purpose. She knew this incident, embarrassing as it had been, would spark something larger. A national conversation about prejudice, respect, and power. Moments later, she took her seat by the window. The hum of the engines filled the cabin. She closed her eyes, reflecting. She thought of every young person watching the viral clip that day, especially those who had been unfairly judged because of how they looked, spoke, or came from. Maybe now, they'd know that calm doesn't mean weakness. That dignity can silence hate louder than shouting ever could. Outside, the runway lights blurred into streaks of gold as the plane began to move. The moment was over, but its echo was just beginning. What would you have done if you saw this happening at the airport? Type record if you'd film it to expose the truth, or step in if you'd speak up right there. By the time AOC's plane landed in Washington, D.C., her phone was buzzing nonstop. The incident at the airport had exploded across social media. Clips from passengers edited with dramatic captions like "When Grace Meets Prejudice" and AOC's calm silence shamed the system were everywhere on TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, and news broadcasts around the world. Some videos had millions of views already. Hashtags like #RespectAOC, #JusticeWithGrace, and #AirportApology were trending globally. AOC scrolled quietly through her notifications as she waited for her luggage. Every network wanted an interview. Supporters filled her feed with messages of admiration, and even many critics, surprisingly, praised how she had handled the situation. She didn't shout. She didn't insult. She educated with presence alone, one journalist tweeted. A few posts from law enforcement officers themselves started circulating too. "Not every officer behaves like those TSA agents," one wrote. "But we all have to take responsibility when bias shows up in our ranks." AOC handled it better than most of us could have. The clip of the FBI agent saluting her was being replayed on morning news shows. The gesture, brief but powerful, had become a symbol. People were calling it the salute heard around the world. Later that afternoon, AOC sat down in her office, surrounded by aides and staffers. One of them, Maya, looked anxious. "Congresswoman," CNN, BBC, even Al Jazeera, they all want a statement. "Should we schedule a press conference?" AOC shook her head gently. "No press conference. Just one message, short, clear, from the heart." She took out her phone and began typing. "I wasn't humiliated today. I was reminded that power can either protect or profile. I choose to keep using mind, open eyes, not point fingers. To every person who's been judged for how they look or where they're from, you deserve respect, not suspicion." #RespectAOC, #equality for all. She hit post. Within minutes, the tweet had over 1 million likes. That night, major news anchors discussed the event as a turning point in how public figures respond to discrimination. Instead of outrage, one commentator said, "She showed restraint and that's why it resonated." Meanwhile, footage from the airport was being used in diversity and ethics training across the country. Some police departments and TSA offices even invited AOC to speak virtually to their officers. But not everyone was supportive. Certain talk shows accused her of using the incident for attention, claiming she was milking victimhood. AOC ignored the noise. She had been in politics long enough to know that sincerity doesn't need to defend itself. Her team suggested she record a short video message, not for TV, but directly for the people who had flooded her with messages of support. The next day, she sat in front of her camera, no makeup artist, no professional lighting, just her in her office, sunlight falling softly through the blinds. She pressed record. Hi everyone. I wanted to say thank you. I've seen your messages, your love, and your outrage, and I appreciate it deeply. But I also want to remind us, what happened at that airport isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's been treated as a suspect in their own country. If we're going to change that, we can't just shame individuals, we have to challenge the mindset. Change doesn't start in Congress. It starts in the way we see each other. So next time you're in a situation like that at an airport, a store, a school, ask yourself, am I judging or am I understanding? That's how we begin to heal. She paused, then smiled softly. And to the officers who handled me that day, I forgive you. Let's do better together. She ended the video and uploaded it. Within hours, it became one of her most viewed clips ever. Meanwhile, the 2 TSA officers involved were placed under review. But something unexpected happened. Instead of public humiliation, AOC quietly requested that they attend an empathy and bias awareness program, not suspension. When reporters asked her why, she simply said, I don't want them punished. I want them changed. That line became the headline the next morning. AOC chooses education over retaliation. It was shared, quoted, and discussed in classrooms, workplaces, and community centers. Her calm defiance had turned a moment of prejudice into a lesson on leadership. Later that week, AOC received a handwritten letter at her office. It was from the younger officer who had frisked her at the airport. It read, Congresswoman, I was one of the officers that day. I didn't recognize you, but after watching how you handled it, I recognized myself and I didn't like what I saw. I've started attending workshops on bias and empathy. Thank you for not hating us when you had every reason to. She read the letter twice, then placed it quietly in her desk drawer. No cameras, no post, just reflection. She whispered to herself, maybe that's what real victory looks like. Outside, the city skyline glowed golden under the evening sun. The chaos had passed, but something deeper remained, a quiet ripple of awareness moving across the nation. If you believe change begins with empathy, not punishment, type change starts with me in the comments and tell me what country you're watching this story from. The morning sun cast long streaks of light across Washington, D.C. when AOC stepped into her office once again. It had been 4 days since the airport incident, but the world hadn't stopped talking about it. Every major network from CNN to BBC to local community stations had replayed the video countless times. News anchors dissected her every move, the pause before she spoke, the calm tone, the lack of anger. Analysts called it a masterclass in grace under pressure, but for AOC, it wasn't about praise. It was about progress. That morning, her aide Maya entered the room, holding a thick folder. Congresswoman, she said, smiling, you're going to want to see this. Inside were hundreds of printed letters, handwritten, typed, even crayon drawings from kids. Some came from airports workers, others from everyday citizens across the globe. One read, I used to think politicians were all the same, but what you did changed how I see leadership. You stood tall without stepping on anyone. Another, from an officer in Chicago, said, after watching what happened to you, I started training sessions in my precinct about implicit bias. We call it the AOC approach. Thank you for reminding us of what honor really looks like. AOC read quietly, a small, proud smile spreading across her face. This, she said softly, is the real headline. That same day, the Federal Aviation Administration issued a public statement promising to review their profiling policies. The TSA announced new training initiatives across airports nationwide, citing recent incidents that highlighted the importance of awareness, respect, and equality. Even the FBI agent who had saluted AOC that day, Special Agent Daniel Reeves, reached out personally. He asked to meet her in D.C. when Reeves entered her office. He looked different, less rigid, more reflective. Congresswoman, he said, extending his hand again, I wanted to thank you. You turned what could have been a scandal into a spark. AOC gestured for him to sit. Agent Reeves, you didn't just salute me that day. You stopped something from spiraling out of control. That's rare. He smiled faintly. I only did what was right. But the truth is, your calm changed how my team behaves now. We've started internal workshops to teach agents how to de-escalate before things get out of hand. AOC's eyes softened. That's how change multiplies, one person, one mindset, one room at a time. Reeves nodded. You know, some of the younger agents have been calling your approach the quiet stand. It's becoming something of a model. She laughed softly. I'll take that over another hashtag any day. Later that afternoon, AOC was invited to deliver a short speech at a community event focused on civil rights and social harmony. It wasn't a press-heavy environment, just teachers, activists, and citizens gathered to share stories of fairness and empathy. When she took the stage, the room fell silent. 4 days ago, she began, I stood in an airport line like any traveler, tired, ordinary, unseen. Within minutes, I was treated as something else, suspicious. I could have walked away angry. Instead, I chose to stay calm, because how we respond to injustice can either multiply it or dissolve it. We live in a time where judgment travels faster than truth. But maybe, just maybe, if we slow down long enough to see people instead of scan them, we might build a kinder world. The crowd applauded, not thunderously, but deeply, emotionally. She continued, her voice steady but filled with quiet conviction. To the officers watching this, I don't hate you. I understand fear. I've felt it too. But fear can't guide our eyes. Let empathy be our first instinct, not suspicion. Let humanity be the uniform we all wear. Her words were clipped, shared, and subtitled in multiple languages within hours. The speech reached international audiences from Manila to Madrid, Nairobi to New York. People everywhere were posting their own stories under the hashtag #TheQuietStand, moments when they faced discrimination but chose calm courage instead of chaos. Meanwhile, back at the airport where it all began, something extraordinary happened. A small notice appeared near the TSA screening area. This checkpoint has been restructured to ensure every traveler is treated with equal respect and dignity. Beneath it, a quote from AOC, "Power is proven not by who you stop, but by how you treat the stopped." Even travelers who didn't know the backstory paused to read it. A young woman took a photo and tweeted, "Saw this at the airport today. Didn't know the full story, now I do. We need more leaders like her." The post went viral again. Back in D.C., AOC ended her day quietly, sipping tea by her office window as the Capitol dome glowed in the fading sunlight. Maya entered once more. "You know, Congresswoman," she said softly, "you turned an airport delay into a global dialogue." AOC smiled thoughtfully. "That wasn't me, Maya. That was all the people who decided to listen instead of shout." She leaned back, gazing at the city lights below. "You can't legislate empathy, but you can inspire it." Her phone buzzed once more, a message from Agent Reeves. It was short and simple. "Thank you for teaching us that real strength doesn't wear a badge, it wears patience." AOC set the phone down, smiling faintly. "Maybe that's the real kind of justice," she whispered. The world outside seemed just a little quieter, not because everyone had changed, but because enough people had started to. What's stronger in your eyes, power or patience? Type your answer in the comments below, and tell me what lesson you took from AOC's quiet stand. A week later, the world still hadn't stopped talking. What had begun as a tense misunderstanding at an airport had grown into something far greater, a global conversation about respect, prejudice, and dignity. Clips of AOC's calm confrontation had reached over 300 million views across platforms. News outlets called it the quiet stand heard around the world. But beyond the viral numbers, something deeper was happening. In schools, teachers were showing the video to students to discuss emotional intelligence and bias. In workplaces, managers were starting diversity sessions with her quote, "Power is proven not by who you stop, but by how you treat the stopped." Even government agencies quietly updated their employee training modules, citing the AOC airport event as a case study in empathy and professionalism. Meanwhile, AOC chose not to bask in the spotlight. She returned to her normal congressional duties, answering emails, meeting with constituents, and preparing policy drafts. But the people around her noticed she carried a new kind of peace. One evening, while walking through the Capitol hallway, a journalist approached her. "Congresswoman, one question, do you feel vindicated after all that's happened?" AOC stopped, thought for a moment, and smiled. "No, I don't feel vindicated. I feel hopeful. Because this time, people didn't argue, they reflected. That's a rare and beautiful thing." Her answer went viral again, not because it was fiery, but because it was real. A few days later, she received a letter stamped from the United Nations. It was an invitation to speak at an upcoming global forum on equality and leadership. The note read, "Your response to prejudice reminded the world that compassion is a political act. We invite you to share your message on a global stage." When AOC took the podium at the UN weeks later, she didn't mention politics, titles, or power. She simply said, "I was called suspicious because of how I looked, But suspicion dies when understanding begins. To every young woman, every traveler, every person who has ever been judged, to quickly remember this. Your worth isn't measured by who believes in you, but by how you believe in yourself. I didn't fight back with anger. I stood back with dignity. And that's how hate lost that day. The hall erupted in applause. Not thunderous, but long, sustained, emotional. That night, as AOC stood by her hotel balcony overlooking New York City, she received one final message, a short video clip sent from an unknown number. It showed the same TSA checkpoint from that fateful day. 2 new officers were greeting travelers, smiling warmly, and right beside them was a small sign with her quote, "Let empathy be your first instinct, not suspicion." Beneath the clip, a message appeared. "From one of the officers who stopped you, thank you for forgiving us." AOC's eyes softened. She set the phone down, gazing out at the skyline, whispering to herself, maybe that's all I ever wanted, not change in policy, but change in people. The city lights shimmered below, endless and alive. Somewhere out there, countless strangers were learning from her quiet stand, proof that even the smallest act of grace could echo louder than any shout. If you believe no one should ever be judged by appearance, type respect in the comments and subscribe for more real, inspiring stories like this one.